So at the start of the Premier League season, lots of people are asking the question, who's going to win the Premier League? And for some, you may think it's a foregone conclusion, but it isn't. And certainly from a trading perspective, who cares? Because you should be able to make money regardless of who goes on to win the league. And this year, that is going to be particularly relevant. So to understand that and what strategy you can use to profit from the Premier League title race, just watch the rest of this video. So let's have a look at this year's league table, ordered in favour of the odds and the chance of that team therefore winning the league. And what do you see? Well, you see a familiar pattern here, and that is that all those big teams are right at the top. And I don't use big teams in a sort of casual way, because these are big teams. They have enormous amounts of turnover. They can buy the best talent in the world. And as a consequence, they're always the ones that are in the frame to win the league. And it's a sad fact that if you want to win the league, you just spend enormous amounts of money, and that helps the situation. And if we look, to cut a long story short, at the amount of money that these teams are spending on wages, that tends to be a good predictor of where those teams will end up in the league. And of course, they introduced financial fair play, but that's a bit of a con because it's based around turnover and other financial metrics, which means that you need the money in order to get the money to be able to spend. And if you don't have the money, you can't overspend to be able to get the money which you need to be able to spend. So yeah, forget that. It's quite depressing being a fan of a team that isn't a big club, as it were, as in the top six or so. Because you know that if you're in the Premier League, then you're going to scramble around to win a few matches a year. The best you can do is avoid relegation. You've really got no chance of any honours whatsoever because it's dominated by those clubs. So if you want the complicated answer as to who is going to win the league, there it is, the club that spends the most amount of money. And, you know, that's just a sad fact of the modern game. However, we don't need to know that in order to profit. We need to know something much, much simpler. And it takes advantage of the way that the league title plays out every year. So the great thing about trading is you don't really need to know what's going to happen in order to be able to profit from it. This is a common misconception that people get when they're actively trading, is that somehow you need to have some amazing ability to understand where the market is going to go. And fundamentally speaking, everything that I've done in all of the time that I've been actively trading on sports isn't particularly based around that. Sometimes it's helpful if you know that, but really what you're interested in is how variable the market is. So the market could start here and end here and therefore not move at all, but you're not fussed about that. You want to know what movement there is in between. And the way that I've summarized this before, it's a bit like tossing a coin, because you toss a coin, it could end up heads or tails. And if you measure the market, you'll find the market's efficient because it always ends up heads or tails, excluding exceptional circumstances. But what you're really interested in when you're trading is how many times that coin flips on its way to ending up heads or tails. You don't care about the income, but the outcome rather, but you do care about, Freudian slip there or what, but you do care about how much variability there is between those two states. And that's exactly how we're going to profit from the Premier League title race. If you look at all of the Premier League title races over the years, this is a market that I've traded for a large number of years. The only downside of this market is when you're actively trading, you have to commit money to the market. And that money that you commit to the market, you won't get paid out until May or whenever the title race is over. So it's a longer term market. You have to commit money to it. That is a bit of a downside, but fundamentally speaking, this strategy has worked really well because despite the fact that a few teams are very dominant, the outcome of the Premier League actually does vary quite a bit over a number of seasons. So what I'll do in this section is I'll throw up some graphs for you that I've taken from previous Premier League seasons where you can actually see how variable the price is. A team will start as favourites, they will begin to progress over the course of the season, and then they will hit a bit of a rough patch. It could be down to injuries, it could be down to all manner of different things. It could be a fixture, congestion and stuff like this, or, you know, there's so many different things that could happen that fundamentally speaking, you get this variability within the market. And then eventually, you know, they'll turn things around or they'll bring in a new player in the January transfer window or something like that. It's quite a complex scenario over the course of the season. But the upshot of that is that even teams that are sort of heavy odds on favourites or look like they're very likely to win the league do run into these little bumps. And that is where the opportunity is within this strategy. So when we look at the league table this year, we see that we've got Manchester City and Arsenal the two that are favoured to run away with the title this year. I say run away with it. It looks like it's going to be quite competitive because they're both priced at around odds of 3. And the interesting thing about this is there is other information that is discounted into this, which I will talk about in a moment. But fundamentally speaking, if you're going to be actively trading this, you're sort of thinking, well, should I back Man City first? Should I lay Man City? Should I back Arsenal? Should I lay Arsenal? What should I do, Peter? And the answer is actually a lot more simpler than that. Because if I do this in the background while I'm talking here, you can see that if you actually go into this particular market, and this is a favoured strategy of mine on big markets that are uncertain, if we go in and we lay Man City at odds of 2, obviously they are not at odds of 2 at this moment in time. And they will reach that point at some point if they win a few games and the title race begins to sort of firm up a little bit. But we could also lay Arsenal at odds of 2. And the interesting impact of that is if we lay 2 things at 2, we will break even. Now, of course, we really want to make some money. So we could say, well, let's lay a third team at odds of 3. But the issue that you then have is, are 3 teams going to trade at odds of 2? And the answer probably is not, especially when you look at historical data on this particular strategy. That doesn't tend to happen. However, it's very likely that Arsenal and or Man City will trade odds on at some point over the course of the season. And as a consequence, when a team hits a big run of form, or maybe one of those 2 teams stumbles, then the price on the other will begin to shorten and will definitely go odds on, at which point you can lay it. And when we reach that particular point in the season, at some point, if it occurs before Christmas, it's very likely that they will have a wobble at some point. Like I said, fixture congestions, injuries, all of those sort of things. The other team will come into contention. And especially when you get those 6-pointer matches between the 2 teams, a win there will significantly shift the odds of this particular market. And therefore, if you can lay both of these teams at odds on, then you will get a chance to make a little bit of profit. So hypothetically speaking here, and I'm not going to say that this is going to happen, but let's take a really good case scenario here. If we lay Man City at odds of 1.5 and we lay Arsenal at odds of 1.5 with the same stake, you can see that that would generate a profit. And, if another team came into contention at some point, you could lay them and sort of square off your book a little bit further and improve your opportunity from there. But this is the core of this strategy, really. It's really simple. If you can lay 2 things at odds of lower than 2, then you will make money. And typically that always happens during the Premier League season. Now, to make things more interesting this year, we have these 115 charges hanging over Manchester City. And that process of examining those charges and working out what the outcome of those charges will transpire during the course of the season. So when we've looked at previous seasons, Man City have actually gone off at very short odds, basically because they were the dominant team and they had the best players, and all of those sort of factors put together made them heavy favourites for the Premier League title. But when you look at the Premier League this year, one of the things that's discounted into that price a little bit at the moment, but not fully, is the fact that there could be points deductions for Manchester City. And that would almost certainly lose them the title if Arsenal have a decent season. But of course, you can't forget some of the other teams as well. You've got a resurgent Chelsea perhaps this year. Liverpool could come into contention as well. And there could be, a few other things going on there that help push those prices out. But fundamentally speaking, this year, I think will be a good year to actually deploy this strategy, simply because we've got these charges hanging over Manchester City. Now, there's talk about them being relegated, but I imagine that it will probably end up being a heavy points deduction if they are found guilty. And that will dramatically increase their odds for the title, simply because if you deduct all of those points and any of those teams around that area play particularly well, it's going to be impossible for them to make up that number of points. So yeah, that's an interesting aspect for you for this season. So fundamentally speaking, when we look at the Premier League title race, it's decided by whoever has the largest amount of money, which can be a little depressing, let's face it. However, there is a fair amount of variability, despite the fact that sometimes teams go off at very short odds. There's a lot of variability over the course of the season. There are 38 games, and then you've got the FA Cup, the Carabao, or whatever it's called now, the English Football League Cup. You've got the Champions League away, all of these things thrown into the mix, injuries to players, big transfers, points deductions, all of those things. And that makes the odds for these teams vary quite a bit more than you probably realise. We know if we can lay two teams at odds of less than 2, we will make money. And, you know, the same applies if we could lay 3 teams at odds of less than 3 or 4 at 4 and stuff like that. All of these sort of strategies work particularly well in these types of market. But if you're going for the big one, laying both these teams at odds of less than 2 would be an opportunity. And you'll have to wait a couple of months or so for one of these teams to sort of begin to dominate and the price to begin to come in and a couple of other teams to fall away. But fundamentally speaking, that very often is an opportunity. And it's certainly been something that has been the case over a large number of years. And I think it's something that you should be looking at this season too.